Are you ready to go retro? That was a big question I asked myself a few weeks back when an invite landed in my mailbox saying, do you want to come on the launch of Triumph's new Speed Twin 1200 and 1200 RS? The truth is that I actually had to dig deep to find the answer. This is not my typical genre of motorcycle. I'm not really into the whole retro scene. I've had very limited experience riding bikes like this, but at the same time, I thought it would be stupid to not give this motorcycle a try. Since 2019, Triumph has sold over 20,000 of these units, and they've just absolutely updated both their models, like I said, the standard 1200 and the RS for 2025. And I wanted to see what they're all about. Okay, so who's it aimed at? That is a good question. Typically speaking, you could say this is one of those bikes that's more inclined towards like the hipster movement, or people that have been brought up on classic bikes and they want something elegant, stylish, but contemporary all the same. I mean, that's what this bike is. It's one of those machines that blurs the line between the past and the present. There's that typical theme of Triumph quality that runs through both of these new models, with loads and loads of features jumping out at me. So arguably, as motorcyclists, we all care about the bikes that we're riding, be it full-on sports bikes or retro machines like this. The look of that motorcycle ignites something within us, and Triumph's done a fantastic job of continuing its timeless retro theme through into these latest iterations of Speed Twins. There are so many beautiful trinkets littering this bike from front to back, so many areas that draw your eye, parts of the sculpture that you can't help but applaud. So as mentioned, there are two versions of the Speed Twin 1200 for 2025. You've got the base model, which is basically a less exuberant version of the machine. It weighs in at just under 12,500 pounds, and it comes kitted with non-adjustable 43mm Marzocchi forks up front and non-adjustable shocks at the rear. You also only get two rider modes on this machine, but it does have cornering ABS and cornering traction control in the package as well. The brakes are non-branded, but they're decent calipers up front. As for the riding position, it's the more chilled of the two machines. So the bars sit a little bit higher, the seat sits a little bit lower, the pegs are that bit more further forward, so a more relaxed stance on the knee angle. You get the point. This is the one that's designed for you to enjoy your riding in absolute comfort. So the RS is basically the model that is going to supersede Triumph's sporty range to this family of classics. You can no longer buy a Thruxton. This is the next best thing in that place. The reason being is that I think the Speed Twin has had huge success, the Thruxton less so, and they basically worked out that as similar as the models are, they had a firm foundation in the Speed Twin to make it a bit sportier, to exaggerate the riding position, to deliver to that audience that want a bit more of an engaging, playful ride. So what they've done is kitted this bike with fancier suspension. So Marzocchi forks up front. At the rear, you've got fully adjustable Öhlins. In fitting those sportier rear shocks, they've also changed the length of them, so they're a little bit higher. And what that means is the poise of the bike is a bit more on its nose, which is great news for those kind of people that want to go and attack corners. Another fancy feature is the standard fit quick shifter and blipper. Now, this is one of those units that has not been on a Speed Twin before, and it's not on the base model. One of the main reasons is that there wasn't the clearance between the foot pegs and the frame to accommodate a shifter, or the system that you needed. But what Triumph's done is they've raised the pegs, and by doing so, they've created just enough space for the unit to sit below the foot pegs. So you've now got the shifter and blipper on this bike here, which is fantastic news for people like me who just depend on systems like that. You also get Brembo Stellima calipers. That's a caliper that needs zero introduction. It's all about performance. It's got the sexy Brembo looks. It's a real statement piece that backs up the performance of the bike as well. As per the base model, the RS also features rain and road rider modes, but it gains the sport mode as well, which sees a reduced level of engagement of traction control. It's priced at 14,495, so a couple of grand up on the base model. So those are the main differences between the two machines, but a lot of the common components cross over between them both. So talking about the new tank, that's the same on both of them. New side panels, new engine casing covers, they've got the same new silencer systems, and they've also got the same new headlight, throttle body covers and wheels. Point number 2. What's the best bit about the bike? Well, in my opinion, having spent the best part of a day riding this bike in Mallorca, it's got to be the engine. So the engine is an evolution of what's come before. It's still the same parallel twin 1200cc motor. It's a stonking thing that produces 112 newton meters of torque, but because they've raised the rev potential of the engine, it's now making around 103 brake horsepower. So it's not exactly setting the world alight in terms of figures, or at least in brake horsepower terms, but in torque, you can't sniff at 112 newton meters. It's a hefty figure, and it's aided by the fact that the 270-degree crank in this thing really punches and pulsates out the delivery. It's a cracking motor and something that was very enjoyable for me. So as I've said, I've never ridden one of these bikes before. I've never ridden any of Triumph's 1200 range. So it was an eye-opener to get on the machine, twist that throttle and realize just how fast this thing would accelerate. I'll be honest, it did take me a little bit by surprise. Not that I was expecting it to be crazy or wild or whatever, but because it almost defied the looks of the bike. You know, this is one of those times where I'm not going to call it a wolf in sheep's clothing, but it's pleasantly surprising. The engine has this great zest about it from really low down in the revs. So for context, this thing is through the red line at 8,000 RPM, and below 2,000 RPM it can almost labor a little bit. So my advice to anyone buying one of these is to keep it in that sweet spot of 2 to 7 realistically. In that kind of figure, you're going to get the best of this machine. A nice linear spread of torque, punches, like I said, nice and low down, and just carries that strength all the way up to the point that it just throws in the towel and you know it's time to hook another gear. The fueling is pretty faultless. Like I said, yes, low down, it does get a little bit lumpy. Keep it in the sweet spot and you're going to love the thing. You can just roll on and off all day long, and you haven't got to be too specific about what gear you're in either, which is something I learned on the route we were riding was a real blessing. We must have tackled 9 million switchbacks on that route that we were testing the bike on, constantly switching side to side, on the throttle, off the throttle. Every single time I needed to get that drive, it was always there, it was always dependable, it was always predictable in just how powerful the delivery was going to be. It was a very easy motor to get on with, and like I said, for me that was probably the biggest hook to this machine. As for the back torque, I mean, we're talking about a big engine here, so expectedly, if you go down the box too many times and you're braking pretty hard, you could get this thing playfully lock in the rear, and that was something I did have a lot of fun with. For other people, it might be something that is a little bit unnerving, so it's something to be aware of, but at the same time, what do you expect on a bike this size? If you treat it nicely, it treats you well in return. So if you want it to be super smooth, that's exactly what it can be. If you want this thing to be more raucous, more playful, you've only got to ask it. On that note, the exhaust system on this machine was specifically tuned to encourage some barking, some burbling on downshifting. And that was something that I really picked up on. You hear that kind of thing in presentations and you take it with a pinch of salt. You know, you kind of think they're just throwing those adjectives out there to get you to resonate them in videos like this. But the truth of it is actually, through riding this bike, there was a constant theme of barking and burbling from that exhaust, and I really did learn to enjoy the note. The actual sound of the exhaust system is pretty decent as well. I mean, just to say this is a Euro 5 Plus rated machine, the exhaust note is really quite meaty, quite throaty, and another thing I liked about it was this 2-stage induction noise. So kind of low down, you get a decent sounding roar from the front end. When you wind the throttle back full, it really just ignites the machine. It kind of resonates through you, this induction noise, and I like that about this. Triumph is always one of the leading brands when it comes to tuning the sound of their machines, and in this instance they've definitely nailed the brief. This thing sounds as great as it looks. Considering this bike has a wheelbase over 1400mm long and it weighs in at 216 kg, it's not exactly a sports bike in terms of geometry and weight and mass, etc. It's long, it's low, it's pretty heavy. It's got a lot of things working against it if you were to just go by numbers and stats alone. But the truth is that I was pleasantly surprised by the riding experience. So I should say by saying I had half the day on the base model before switching to the RS. What I found with the base model, which has got the more relaxed riding position and less aggressive stance with the suspension, is that the bike would initially turn quite well, and then it felt as if I had to put more energy in. The further I wanted to lean, I had to make it lean further. Essentially, it was a very stable motorcycle, which is fine. You know, not everyone wants a twitchy, aggressive turning motorcycle. For those people that just enjoy cruising around and enjoying their rides, you know, without getting too vigorous, the base model is fantastic. And also on that note, what I did find was with the softer setup that machine had, it was really quite good at absorbing the lumps and bumps in the roads that we came across. Truth be told, the minute I got on the RS, the riding experience was cranked up to another level. So along with that more poised riding positions, you got the jacked up seat, the lower bars, that feeling of being more over the front end, the ride became a lot more animated as well. I felt like I could attack the corners a lot harder. I liked the better connection with the front end. The feel through the Odin suspension was also on another level. I was really able to kind of throw this bike around a lot harder. I was feeling better what was coming back through me, which again allowed me to crack on and extract the best from this machine. Things that impressed me with the RS were not just how much more agile it was, but the better connection between the front wheel and the rear as well, which helped not just going into corners, but when I was trying to get out of bends as well. There was just this nice connection between the two. I was able to kind of hang off in the way that I would want to hang off a motorcycle and push that bit harder with absolute confidence. Arguably, with a stiffer bike, you do feel more. So those lumps and bumps I mentioned earlier that were a breeze on the base model, yeah, you did get a bit of a kick every time you hit one of those on the stiffer machine, but you can't have it always. Triumph's done something impressive by trying to deliver to both sides of the market here. What I'm not going to say is that it's a sports bike. I'm not prepared to go down that route, but those that try it, especially those that are used to contemporary naked machines, you're not going to be put out by riding one of these. It handles far better than you'd probably expect. And you know, even when you're like trail braking into corners or like gassing the bike out of a bend, there's just so much more support and stability on the RS than I was expecting. This bike is no Luddite. So while it's not exactly dripping in tech, there's a fair amount of innovation technology within the Speed Twin and the Speed Twin RS. So what they've got in common is the same new circular TFT dash. I've heard a few people say that they preferred the older look on the Speed Twin. I never saw it, so I don't know. What I do know is that the dash on this bike is easy on the eye. It's got some great information there. It's not overwhelming. It just sits nicely on the bike, giving you what you need to know. One thing I also found whilst riding this bike was the way Triumph's configured the clock. You don't see half of the features that are on the dash. They're all kind of nicely blacked out into the background. They light up, such as your indicators, such as hazards or daytime running lights. You know, they all kind of punch out the clock when you engage the system. The same goes for the traction control light, which is something I had flashing quite a lot. So I want to labor on this point quite a bit. So sometimes I get a little bit bored on press rides, and one game I decided to play on the base model was being able to kind of keep up at the front with the bike in full rain mode. By doing that, I was able to experience just how engaging the traction control is on the base model in rain mode. And needless to say, it's pretty damn engaging. It's all cornering related, so the more you're leaning over, the more restricted it is. So you could be pretty much, don't try this at home, but you could be pretty much full throttle, round a bend, and you wouldn't really get any drive. Everything is so limited and stripped back for your safety. So what that meant was it was more about getting into a bend, trying to get stood out, at which point the power would come back in and you'd blast up to the next bend before firing into that. So it was a good game to play. and a good way to kind of experience during the riding just how engaging that technology is. So going over to road mode, that kind of stripped things back another level. For me, it was still way too intrusive. For the way I like to ride, I could not avoid having the traction control constantly engaging. And the sad truth is that you pretty much have two choices on that standard model. On the base model, you either have rain or road. So in other words, your only other option is to turn the traction control off altogether, which is something you can do by going into the dash. But yeah, I mean, whether you'd want zero traction control is another step altogether. Hopping onto the RS, that gave me sport as an option. And when I had that engaged, it was far less often that I'd find the traction control kicking in and holding my ride back. It was still there, but I could live with it and I enjoyed it. And it was nice to know that there was that little bit of safety there. But at the same time, you know, I was allowed to have as much fun as I wanted. As far as the cornering ABS is concerned, again, that's non-switchable on either machine. What's weird is that on the base model, I actually found the bikes had more bite and aggression than they did on the fancier Brembo Stelima calipers on the RS. Don't know why, but that's just how it was for me. One thing that was consistent was that on either machine, I could get that ABS kicking in almost on demand, and a few times exactly when I didn't want it. So there were no end of crests and turns and all kinds of undulations on the route that we're traveling. A couple of times I was hard on the brakes, and I mean hard, and the ABS would kick in right on the top of a crest, and I'd find myself in this heart in mouth moment where, well, I guess the ABS kind of kicked in full, and you'd almost have this freewheel of about a meter or two before the system sorted itself out and started to apply the anchors again. What it was doing was trying to stop me from locking, but at the same time I'd have this run on, and considering the number of like cliff edges and whatnot that were in any which direction on this route, it wasn't reassuring, I should say, at times. In truth, if you bought one of these, chances are you're not going to be riding it like that. If I owned this bike, I wouldn't have been riding it the way that I was riding it on the launch. So I dare say people that actually put their hand in their own pocket and buy one are going to treat it with a lot more respect. So as mentioned, on the base model, you don't get the quick shifter and blipper, which you do on the RS. So the shift assist system is something that I would struggle to go without. Riding the base model, I found the gearbox to be really quite clunky, quite archaic. It wasn't the smoothest. Even, you know, with using the clutch up and down the box, it's quite a harsh gearbox on this bike. Even using the shifter and the blipper on the RS version, I did find that the gearbox was not the slickest. When you compare it to other options within Triumph's range, yeah, it wasn't the finest example of a gearbox. Maybe another thing to say in the bike's defense is that, you know, these machines are all very, very low mileage. Gearboxes are one of the biggest thing to run in on a motorcycle these days. So maybe that's something that would change with time, you know, as everything gets bedded in. But in my experience, that quick shifter and that blipper really was a game changer. I just felt like it took an element of thinking out the equation so I could focus more on the riding. And just to say on that note, you can't retrospectively fit the shifter and blipper system to the base model because of the clearance needed with the foot pegs. That just isn't there on the standard model. As for the rest of the systems, well, there aren't really that many functions that you can go in and change or add on or whatever. There's no cruise control, there are no heated grips. There are a number of kind of systems such as those that are missing from the equation. I asked Triumph, you know, why that was. So on a motorcycle costing, you know, the best part of £15,000, why is there no cruise control? Why are there no heated grips? The reason was that this bike is sold globally, and in some nations they simply don't want to pay for heated grips, you know, or they don't warrant cruise control. So they've stripped everything right back. You can get those systems added on as an optional extra. So if they're kind of breaking points for you, if they're necessities to have, make sure when you're going to your dealership that you're asking for those features to be added into your build. Point number 5, it's not just for hipsters. So look, you're on the Fast Bikes channel. If you've got this far, chances are that, like me, you're a hardcore sports bike, super naked fan. Yet here you are, still watching this video, getting my take on the new Speed Twins. The truth is that I went into this test kind of open-minded, but not exactly expecting to be sold on the package. I came out of it with a very positive experience in the bank. So would I rush out to the shops to go and buy one? Maybe not, because for me, I know there are better fitting models within Triumph's range than the Speed Twin. But at the same time, I quite liked how playful the machine was, how unassuming it was. Here's a bike that could really surprise a few people if you turned up at the local bike meet and then chased a load of people home on their sports bikes. It's really unassuming. It's a bit of an underdog, and I like that about that. I also like the fact that it's a motorcycle that Triumph's really gone to the nth degree to make look nice, to sound nice, to deliver to the rider. It's one of those machines that's been very considerably thought out, and I respect that. What I came to realize on this launch was that this is not a machine that's just for the likes of hipsters, etc. In fact, I don't know much about hipsters, but what I'd say is that they like to be unique. They like to have their own take. They like to take a motorcycle, cut it around, get rid of this, blah, blah, blah. This is a perfectly polished, ready to go, fantastic motorcycle. And if you want something with character, with classic looks, and like I said, that unassuming edge, then this is for you. You haven't got to kind of fit in with a certain genre of motorcyclist or whatever. You've just got to want something that's torquey, simple, fun to ride, and that little bit different. I guess you could say this has been something of a pivotal moment for me, a chance to have my eyes opened and realize that I don't always need something clad in plastic and capable of doing 200 miles per hour. Sometimes you need a bike that looks great, sounds great, and draws attention when you park it up at the side of the road. Am I ready to go retro? I don't know. The truth is though that I'm probably closer than I've ever been.